Welcome back. Right now, neither side is budging. The clock is ticking on a potential economic calamity in the coming months if House Republicans in the White House aren't able to come to an agreement on raising the nation's borrowing limit to avoid a government default. The Biden administration today reiterated its opposition to House Speaker Kevin McCarthy's proposal that passed the House on Wednesday. That would pair an increase in the debt limit with across-the-board spending cuts. The White House is demanding a debt limit increase with no strings attached, and they say that their position is non-negotiable. But in recent days, the Biden administration has begun to face some pressure from some moderates in their own party to sit down and begin hammering out a deal with Republicans before it's too late. Because at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, the House has a role to play. I'm joined now by Congressman Josh Gottheimer, Democrat from New Jersey, co-chair of the bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus. And they have a break glass in case of emergency plan of their own to try to raise the debt limit. So let's take a look at that break glass plan. Congressman Gottheimer, good to see you.
Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
So, the basics of your plan seem like a reasonable way to punt, if you will, for 6 months. Is that the best we can hope for?
Well, listen, I think, as you just said, it's a break glass. What we can't afford, as you know, is going off the fiscal cliff and sending our economy and our savings and our reputation in the world into complete free fall, right? That's unacceptable. So what we've presented is if we're facing that and literally we can't get folks to talk and figure and work this out, here's a way that we can get some more time to actually work through some of our long-term fiscal health issues and suspend the debt ceiling so that we don't default on our debt. And it's unacceptable to even ponder that. Look,
I know you have the handful of Republicans that are a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus that are ready for something like this. But have you talked to anybody in leadership? Have you talked to anybody on the Republican side of leadership that you think at some point they'll at least not stop an idea like this?
I think so. You know, we've 32 Republicans in the Problem Solvers now, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of conversations with leadership. I mean, obviously, they put forward what they think is their best proposal this week. I mean, I think it was, outrageous on lots of fronts. Let alone what it's going to do to veterans and seniors and law enforcement, and But let's put that aside for a second, and because we know that that's actually now put aside, that's now dead on arrival. We got to get back to the table and figure out what we are going to do. And that's what I think a lot of us are pushing for is everyone's got to sit down and the White House with Senate leadership and House leadership and figure out a way forward here. You can't wait to the last minute. We can't afford to be downgraded. And we certainly can't afford to default. So I think our plan is one way out. I hope they utilize that and frankly, whatever they think is the best way forward that does not lead to a default.
I understand the political line that the White House wants to draw on this when it comes to, hey, we don't negotiate over this. You did it. At the end of the day, is that a sustainable position to hold?
Well, I think it's fair to keep saying we're not going to mess around and negotiate with the debt ceiling and the debt and the full faith and credit of the United States. I think that's a reasonable position. I think most Americans and people in business all around the country would agree with that, right? It's our credit card bill. You got to pay your bill. I think what has to happen is to sit down and talk about longer-term fiscal health and debt and deficit. That is a place where I think the country wants us to come together and talk about. So, it's a little semantics at this point, right? What you're talking about, you're really just talking about the economy of our country. And I think it's really fair to say, hey, let's go all get in a room and start talking about the economy of the country. We may not solve it on day one, but let's just sit there every day until we actually make some progress.
Do you feel as if everybody's above board in here? Or, there's some Democrats who believe Republicans are comfortable tanking the economy because it'll hurt Biden more than it hurts them.
Yeah, I think there are definitely some people I've spoken to on the extreme right who believe it's worth the short-term pain for our economy for the long-term gain that they perceive they'll net out of it. I think that's crazy. I think they're playing literally with fire, and they don't understand the economic impact. I think some of them think this is just some sort of government shutdown. This is literally the full faith and credit of the United States of America. The only folks who are going to win are the government of China, right, who would like to be the peg currency of the world. So, I think some folks don't understand the calamity that it could cause, but I don't think it's a political issue. I think it's more of they just believe deeply that it's worth it to do this to the economy and take this risk.
I want to get your reaction to a conversation we just spent 15 minutes having and that is the country's discomfort and distaste for a rematch between Biden and Trump. You're in as swinging of a district as you can find in the country. Is this a district that is divided because there's no moderation, or and you have half that love Biden and half that love Trump, or do you have a district that sort of represents this poll finding that we found where really only 5% of Americans want to see both men run?
I'll tell you this: they don't want to see Trump run around here, and they don't want more extremism. You know, and I've been talking to a lot of folks about it lately, and what I hear back is on President Biden, we start for what you immediately pivot to look what we got done in the last 2.5 years, and it's a much better it immediately becomes a much better conversation, because you think about whether it's the infrastructure bill or the CHIPS bill or the veterans legislation or the common sense gun legislation, you start ticking through actual accomplishments, which, by the way, would make up any presidential campaign. And suddenly, you know, I think people have a different tune about the experience and just the civility and calm that President Biden brings to the equation. And so it's funny how once you go into that, people quickly perk up in a different way. And I think that's a good argument. Going back to Trump gets an immediate, thumbs down from Republicans that I talk to, from lots of moderate Republicans. They say absolutely not. There's no chance. And I'm in a suburb, right? And I think we saw that in suburbs. It's
interesting to me that you say that when you start talking about what you got done during the first 2 years, that works with voters, because that is not the reelection announcement I saw from President Biden, right? They really are leaning more into the danger of another Trump term. They're not leading with what they've gotten done.
Well, listen, I think and I could just speak for here in northern New Jersey. You talk about fixing the roads and bridges and building the Gateway train tunnel, and you talk about actually domestic manufacturing, standing up to China by building chips and supporting our veterans, and electoral reform that we got done, which does directly take on the Trump issue. People really perk up. So listen, I'm sure there are going to be plenty of ads that get run over the next bit. And I hope they do lean into the accomplishments, because, Chuck, you've been around a long time. Last Congress, a lot got done, right? An incredible amount got done in a tight situation. So I think it's what we should talk to folks about.
Good news is in about a decade, the public will then give credit. Sadly, it is. I know I say this. I think the public won't feel it for that long. Over time.
Some things will take longer than others, but we got to tell people. If you don't tell people, it's on us to actually communicate it. If you don't tell people, definitely they won't know. But listen, we're starting to feel things here immediately on broadband and roads. Like it is happening. I wish it were happening faster, of course, and there's a lot of jobs that come with that work. But it's happening. We just got to make sure that we tell people about it.
Very quickly, I know you're on some committees where this matters. The First Republic situation right now, the likely failure of that, the inability to find a buyer. Do you view this as continued systemic risk, or is this simply a situation that's more unique to this bank?
Well, I think we saw in the report that came out on Silicon Valley Bank today, you have certain banks that have had certain exposure, right? And if you're structured a certain way with certain exposure and certain investments in our asset class, you could face an issue like this. I don't think it's systemic. I think we were facing, after Silicon Valley Bank, a systemic crisis, and I think we stepped in and addressed it. And we still have work to do to understand exactly why the Fed wasn't more involved and watching what was happening. And I'll be interested in that with First Republic as well. But the bottom, I don't think this is broadly systemic. I think this is a specialized bank with very high, if you look at the asset mix in this particular bank, very high net worth depositors had massive savings, and people said, oh, geez, I can't be this concentrated, and then decided to pull out, right? So, I think it's in a unique circumstance here. What we have to do is make sure people feel very comfortable that the money in their bank will be there when they go look for it. We have to back up deposits. We got to watch very carefully on social media and these immediate runs. So we got a lot of work to do, but I believe this is not a systemic issue on this one.
All right. Congressman Josh Gottheimer.
Thanks. Thanks, Chuck.
Democrat from northern New Jersey, representing, like I said, one of the swing districts in the country. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.